Good day, everybody. Having done the monthly tarot outlooks for all the signs, I thought, what can I do now? So I thought I'll talk about tarot cards, more particularly the card that almost everyone, when they're learning tarot or becoming interested in tarot, they struggle with, and that is the Sun. And same with me. When I first started kind of picking up tarot and getting into its vibration, the Sun card would come up and I'd be like, it's the Sun. What more can you say about it? Well, you can say quite a lot about it, to be perfectly honest. And I think it's probably, for me, the reason it's the one of the more problematic cards to get into is that because it is so very simple and so very close to what we need to do in order to shine ourselves. So let's get into it. For those of you that perhaps don't know, you may just have come across this video quite randomly because the universe wants you to get to know a little bit more about your subconscious mind. Tarot is a tool that allows you to access your subconscious mind, and in some cases, your higher self. Now, the higher self has come to be known by many names, but we're just, for the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to refer to it as your higher mind or your higher self. Okay. Give it whatever name you want. It really doesn't matter. So in your higher self, it is the potential to do great things. It really, really do great things. And we get in the way of that higher self desire to do great things with the lower mind or the lower self. Now, for many years and many centuries, that lower self nature has been used to control us, to keep us in fear. And fear, again, if you're new to this channel, if you're not, then you'll know what I'm going to say next. Fear is lack of knowledge. So every time that we don't know, we're in fear. Now, many of those fears are just left to run ignored. Like every time you go outside of your front door, you don't know necessarily what's going to happen. So there is a degree of fear. And as you go about your day, you learn and your fear becomes less. But if you really want to tune into what fear is, when we don't know, we don't act, or we do things that are perhaps considered to be crazy out of desperation, or we do things that we've done before. So this is why you'll often see people that suffer from anxiety having like a routine or a ritual they go through. That just gives them something to cling on to rather than experience the awful feelings that come with anxiety. But the fear I'm talking about is the natural fear that stops us from doing new things or stops us from being amazing. So the Sun, in that respect, then, is enlightenment. And enlightenment is nothing more than shining a light within, knowing yourself. Now, we live in an age, again, where there are many, many things to be fearful of, if you choose to be. And once upon a time, when there wasn't the great exchange of information, and I'm talking, right the way back where you lived in your own village and you probably would have only gone to the big town once or maybe 3 or 4 times a year to market, to sell cattle or buy cattle or stock up on supplies, and you would have kind of farmed and done your own thing, then your world was smaller, and the only thing that would have affected you was find food, find heat, find shelter, keep well. That would have been it. But now we have too much information. And again, that's an aspect of the Sun. There's a great deal of stuff coming in. Think about sunlight. It isn't just light. There's radiation in there. It's probably every single spectrum on the electromagnetic spectrum that's coming to us. That's why you get a suntan, folks. And if any of you out there are worried about the the wonderful old chestnut of 5G, then just know that the stuff that comes from the sun and comes to us through solar radiation is far more energetic and far more potentially damaging than anything that you're going to pick up around a phone mast. That's fact. Okay, that's fact. So let's not dwell too much on that. Otherwise, I'll have to get my tinfoil hat out, which again would help protect me from UVA and UVB, which can lead to suntan and and skin cancer, can't it? So the sun is a card that really talks about self-awareness and self-enlightenment, diving into those deep, dark parts of our psyche, our mind. If you were constantly brought up in a situation where you were told you can do it, I sit often with my little one watching a show called Blue's Clues, which is a sweet little show where there's an animated dog and the dog's chum, and they have to solve these little clues. And the song that goes with it is, if you use your mind to take a step at a time, you can do anything that you want to do. That's a great thing to teach kids, isn't it? And this is the thing, isn't it? When you think about a new challenge, so think of the sun as this archetype. So every day the sun comes up and we get daytime, but in our minds, the sun will rise on a landscape. And that landscape is littered with many, many artifacts, isn't it? Your memories, what you were taught was acceptable as a child. The atmosphere that you grow up in shapes you beyond belief. It creates the landscape of your lower mind and your ego. And there's a lot of debate about ego. There always has been, whether we go back to Freud and even beyond Freud. But really, for our everyday development, the ego is just that part of you that learnt to be or not to be when you were young. It develops out of this instinctive knowing that you have as a being, that there is more to life than you can see, feel, or even know, and that you yourself are more than you can see, feel, or know, and everybody else around you saying this is difficult, that's too, you can't do. Oh, okay. And then in the end, the dichotomy between what you know and what you are shown becomes so great that there's a little break. And that's why none of us can remember what it was like to be born, or any memories much past the age of 3. And that's the point, halfway through that 7-year cycle. So the sun rises on this landscape of artifacts and they cast shadows. And our job really is to get as close to the source of light as possible, because the closer you get to the light, there's less opportunity for a shadow in front of you. You'll cast a shadow behind you, won't you? But you won't cast a shadow in front of you. So you can see more clearly. But in order to kind of tolerate that light, you need to be very skilled. If you look directly at the sun, please don't look directly at the sun. It's dangerous. If you do, you'll hurt your eyes. You'll burn your corneas, and you'll potentially blind yourself. So how do we look directly? Well, the safest way, to use an astronomical analogy, is to project the light onto a screen. Now, we can do that internally. And the way we do that is by stop looking externally for our frame of reference, or our ideas or our knowledge, and kind of turn it around and look at the inner projector screen that we have, which is embodied by the third eye. Okay, think of your pineal gland. It's like this. I envisage it as this huge, great, massive telescope. When you think about those great astronomical telescopes that sit on top of mountains in Chile and other parts of the world, and the aperture opens and they gaze out upon the universe. Sometimes the objects that they view are so far away, they have to set their camera to such a long exposure, and the telescope is timed to move in time with the rotation of the Earth, so that object stays dead center of the frame. And this is kind of like meditation. It's a metaphor, really. Sometimes things are so close to us, we get it just like that. And at other times we have to kind of sit for a long time and let that image build up on our internal screen. So that's what we do. It's about turning our view around. You could use an even simpler analogy if you like. If you were faced with an incredibly bright light in front of you, and just turn around and hold a screen up so you could see a reflection of that light. And that's what really we are. We are in our own right little suns. The sun is the center of the solar system, and we are the center of our own solar system. You are the center of your own world. You literally are the center of your own world. And all those centers, sometimes worlds will intermesh for a while, a season, or perhaps even longer, and sometimes they'll come apart. So the sun is very much about, the meaning of it is, you know, self-awareness, self-enlightenment, recognition, joy. Everybody likes to see the sun. Well, most people do. Some people moan when the sun comes out. I think that's why we have such terrible weather in this country, because whenever there's more than half a day of sun, everybody moans. Oh, it's so hot. Well, you've had 360 degrees of rain, you know, let's give it a chance. You see, the reason the sun is such a difficult card to comprehend when we learn tarot is because that's probably the most difficult work of all, to do the inner work. Everybody runs around trying to become better. No other race in the history of creation has done that. You know, you don't see bunches of ants, you know, gathered around a leaf discussing how they're going to, how can we do this better, you know. Maybe we could start an ant committee for leaf transportation, and perhaps we could monetize it. And, you know, they just do it, don't they? You know, because they need leaves to chomp up to make their nest and make food and so on. But we're the only race that thinks about stuff and tries to do it in a way that's more complicated, because complicated is better. And I really laugh, because when I started to do this kind of stuff years ago, you just kind of learned it, and the only books you really had were kind of old books, or books written by people that had taken too many drugs in the 60s and 70s and had, you know, some incredible enlightening journeys and were lucky enough to survive. But now, you know, the world is wide for doing it. Everybody's a guru, and that's great. But the problem is, as with any organization, it's an old saying, isn't it? You know, too many chiefs, not enough workers. So we all need to be responsible for our own guruship. It's nice to have someone to follow. It's nice to have something to look up to, isn't it? But ultimately, as the old Taoist saying says, seek not to be the master or the guru, seek what the guru seeks. Now, you know, what are we seeking? Well, we should be seeking to go within. Again, it is an interesting anomaly that we know more scientifically about outer space than we know about our own deep oceans. Isn't that amazing? We can, you know, go to the moon. Yes, we went to the moon, and we can fling satellites out and send them off to the darkest reaches of, you know, or now into solar space, interplanetary space with the Voyagers. And yet we can't get more than a mile down, you know, into our own oceans. It's a great anomaly for the human condition. We know everything about the outside world, and we know absolutely diddly squat about what goes on inside of ourselves, even physically. Do you know how you digest your food? You don't. Many of you won't, and yet you do it perfectly. It's crazy, isn't it? That just speaks of the true weight and wealth of your potential intelligence, friends. How do you go about the process of extracting oxygen from the air you breathe in, shunting it into the bloodstream, sticking it to the red cell that then gets pumped around and nourishes every single part of your being, and then gives up the exhaust gas and exchanges it back into the air that you breathe out. Not a clue, and yet you do it perfectly. And that's the higher self. So you see, the higher self is a very different process. It doesn't require thought. It just does. It links into that whatever you want to call it, vibration, song of creation, quantum wiggle, whatever you want to call it, and it just does what it needs to do. So the sun is all of those things. And one of the great ways that we could use this in a kind of daily visualization or daily exercise is to imagine. I love that word, imagine, and image. They're so close, aren't they? To image within, to imagine on your internal screen, projected on by what comes in through your third eye. Again, chakras, it's an ancient concept, and they have different meanings dependent on the cultural route that you draw from. And most of us are familiar with the kind of Indian version of the chakras, most through yoga and so on. But they all serve a purpose. At this point, I urge you to check out the information button up here and avail yourself of the journey through the chakras series that I made some years ago before I had all this. Because it will help you with your physical health. So the chakras relate on one level to the endocrine system, your hormonal glands, pituitary, pineal, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, sex organs. So balancing the hormonal system gives all kinds of benefits to the body. It certainly does. One of the other things about the sun, whenever it comes up in a reading, check your vitamin D intake. Okay, we're all vitamin D deficient, particularly in countries where the weather's less than, if you live in tropical climes, you're going to be okay. I read a study a couple of years ago, and I can't remember the whys and the wherefores, but you can do your own research, of course, that the closer one gets to the equator, of course, the sunnier it is, the warmer it is, the less incidence of depression and diabetes there is. Interesting, that. So the further you go away, then people get pissed off because it's miserable. Apart from the good people of the Scandinavian countries, who are some of the happiest in the world. Interesting that, isn't it? So do check out the Hygge or Hygge. It's the great practice of well-being. Hygge is another way of saying it. Or Hygge, if you're ignorant like me, because it looks like Hygge. So here's a great thing you can try. Imagine it's dark, and in your head you are looking towards the east. And as the sun rises, beautiful and yellow, colour of wisdom, as the sun rises, gradually there are no shadows cast. And you can imagine your eyes closed, and you can imagine as the sun rises, it warms you, gets into that third eye. And every morning when you do this, imagine that the sun rises and there are no shadows before you, no artifacts before you. So everything is clear. Everything that comes to you is clear. And then you could imagine as you go to sleep, or before you go to sleep in the evening, you imagine the sun setting in the west. And again, there are no shadows as it goes down. And even though its light and heat disappears, you know instinctively that when you turn around in the east, it's going to come back up again, because that's the ultimate truth. Everything is duality. Yin and yang drives the universe. Yang is light, hot. Yin is dark, wet, moist. And there's no bad thing in duality, as long as you understand that one polarity gives rise to the other. This is the great lesson, I think, in Taoism, which is lost. It would, you hear lots of people go, oh, it's a universe of duality. If there's good, there's got to be evil. But that's just subjective, isn't it? You know, it depends which side won the war. The other side then is evil, right? But, and again, that's a literalism. So don't go getting all bent out of shape, because, you know, there are some really nasty people in the world, and there have been some really nasty people in the world. And, you know, and that's another question that's often asked, isn't it? Well, if there's a God, why does he let these things happen? Well, if there was a God, and he was a wonderful, loving God, the only way that stuff could have happened is if people turned their heads to face away from that love and kindness, isn't it? Personally, I don't believe that there is this all-powerful being that sits on a cloud and can see everything all at once. I think that's rather a naive. If I'm wrong, then do forgive me. But I do believe that we should, as the good book says, love thy neighbour as you love yourself. And of course, if you turn away from that concept, then you are going to do nasty things to people and to yourself. Okay. So that's another aspect of the sun. Cast some light on the situation. Let's not just take our one secular view of what's happening. Cast the light and look at the whole situation. Be what has come to be known, strangely, as the devil's advocate. And this leads me on briefly to another card, which is very misunderstood and gives people what I would refer to as the heebie-jeebies sometimes. It's the devil. Write the word devil down, turn it around, it's lived. So the concept of devil's advocate is the ability to see both sides, and that's what the devil is. It's like the doorway between what you think you can do and what you are actually able to do, what your true potential is. And the only thing that drops your true potential is your belief that you can't. So by doing that visualization with the sun, gradually no shadows by artifacts cast, you're going to be able to access more and more of that light that shines directly into there, for want of a better metaphor, and have better ideas, have a more radiant being, a super furry coat and a wet nose, and all those other things that we desire. So, if you struggle with the sun, have a little look. I saw a quote the other day which made me really, really interested. And it's a quote by Carl Jung. And paraphrasing, it's something like, whatever you see in the world that you don't like, it is something that you've pushed out or ignored within yourself. And of course, this is interesting because it gives us this notion that everything that goes on in the world that we don't agree with is either nothing to do with us or completely our fault. And indeed, really the truth is it's both. Because the universe, if we think of ourselves as universal expressions of awareness, then the universe doesn't take sides. It doesn't, you know, the universe is not out to get you. You know, it's not out to get you. It doesn't, in the nicest possible way, it doesn't care. It doesn't see you as an individual bit. It's just the universe. It's got no sense of self, really. But the reason that these things go on in the world is because we don't see ourselves as all the same thing. If you shone the light of the sun onto any situation where there was a war going on, then what you'd see is that you've got parts of a collective awareness, parts of the same collective awareness, dropping ordnance. It's a bit like holding your hand out and stabbing it with a bread knife. That's how ridiculous it is, but we do it, don't we? The reason that it happens is because people have turned away from, you know, love your neighbor as you would love yourself. Okay, that's not Christian, that's just common sense, right? So there we are. That's the sun in a rather large interdimensional nutshell. I hope it's given you some food for thought. I'm going to try and make a video every day. I might just go through some tarot stuff because it's all been all about astrology, hasn't it, recently? And astrology is great, but so's tarot. Two very different things, two very different spanners in the toolkit of gaining information, pulling out the nuggets of information from the darkness of ignorance. And ultimately, that's what we all should be students of, really. So yeah. What are your preferences? Do you prefer tarot or astrology, or do you like to mix it up? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, I've enjoyed this. I hope you do. Remember, the sun, it will come out tomorrow. And yeah, let's see how more aware we are in 6 months' time. Take care. See you soon.